A court in Moscow today denied Alexey Navalny's appeal for release from detention. The opposition leader has been in custody since returning to Russia a week and a half ago. He had been in Germany recovering from an assassination attempt. Navalny has a parole hearing scheduled for next week. He risks being sent to a penal colony for up to 3.5 years. His allies have called for further protests in Russia this weekend. So Charlie Daggett has been following all of this from London for us. Bring us up to speed, Charlie. What happened in court today?
Well, Anne-Marie, we watched the whole thing unfold, and at first he was, he looked high-spirited. He was joking around with his prison guards. He said, "You'll be banished." He said it was the first time he's been able to speak with his lawyers. That was one of his complaints. And officially what was happening is this is a hearing asking for his release, which I guess everybody assumed that wasn't going to happen. He's going to be held until at least February 2nd. It could be as late as February 15th. He's got a 30-day sentence before they look at this more serious allegation against him. But I just have to quote a few of the things he said. He demanded to be released. He called the allegations against him absurd. He was very defiant. He said, "This is blatant lawlessness to intimidate me and other people." He said, "We will never allow these people to seize and steal our country. Yes, brute force is on your side now. You can put me in handcuffs, but that will not continue forever."
So Navalny's team has called for more protests like the ones we saw all over Russia over the weekend that resulted in the arrest of thousands. Are those calls, I know that the opposition and folks who are taking to the streets in cities all across Russia have said that they will continue to do that, Charlie. Do you expect to see more this weekend?
We do expect to see more, Vlad, despite attempts from the Russian government to crack down on Navalny's supporters. It's interesting. I think we were waiting to see whether Navalny himself was going to call his supporters out into the street, which he did do when he was arrested just over a week ago. He said, "Do not be afraid, take to the streets." He didn't mention that today. I feel maybe he didn't even need to mention that. As you said, tens of thousands of people from across Russia, 11 time zones, took to the streets to protest for Navalny's release, against his imprisonment, anti-President Putin, anti-government, anti-corruption. So yes, those demonstrations and protests had already been called to repeat this weekend, and we fully expect to see those demonstrations continuing. And I have to say, we've discussed this before. I've covered several anti-President Putin demonstrations. Nothing like the scale of what we saw there in terms of like squaring off against riot police, pelting them with snowballs, whatever they could get their hands on. So it's certainly ratcheting up the tensions.
I know that Navalny's wife had been picked up at one point. I think she's been released, but now we're finding out that the Russian police raided the apartments and offices of Navalny associates, including his brother. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, for the past couple of days, there's sort of been this full court press on Navalny's supporters, including his brother, as you mentioned. So they raided the apartments of his supporters in Moscow and in other areas. And they showed video of it themselves. I mean, they're making a statement here. And at one point, one of Navalny's supporters just gently was playing the piano. She was playing Beethoven as Russian police charged through her apartment. So yes, this is, there she is there playing the piano as the police came in, and she's just calmly dealing with it, making her own sort of quiet statement or protest there. And we have seen this in the past. The Russian police have used a sort of harassment techniques, and they've done that with Navalny himself. I mean, he's been arrested several times for several different reasons. Normally, he spends a couple of days in jail and he's released. They really don't want to have a situation where you've got such a high profile, I guess I would put it, because I can't really say he's that influential within Russia, but he's certainly making a noise and he's getting under the skin of President Putin. They don't want to give demonstrators and protesters a reason to do so. So normally, Navalny and his supporters, his brother, etc., would spend a short time in jail and then they're released as a sort of punitive measure. This is going to be, I'm not going to use the word unprecedented, that's used too many times, but we haven't seen anything like this to this level at this point.
So, Charlie, just remind our viewers, what precisely is the Russian state accusing Navalny of?
Vlad, that is a key question. You know, so many people have been asking why Navalny returned to Russia. He didn't have to return. I mean, he was sort of on an international warrant. And in fact, there were people within Russia, government people within Russia, who were saying, it's not a good idea to return. You're almost certainly going to be facing jail. Technically speaking, he's accused of violating probationary terms for a 2014 suspended sentence on fraud charges. And what he was wanted for is not appearing for his parole hearings. And he said today, when addressing that court, and of course everybody else that was watching, he said, how on earth could I have done that? I was in a German hospital recovering from a poisoning from the Russian state. So I'm sorry I didn't make my parole hearing, but that's why. And that's why he's calling it absurd. But that's technically what they've got him on. And if that charge sticks, I mean, he's in prison now. He's not in a jail. He's in a prison now. If that charge sticks, he could be looking at up to 3.5 years of jail time. That's just on that. There are other charges, including incitement and the kind of protests that you've been seeing with a call to people to protest in the streets. These are unsanctioned protests. That itself is against the law in Russia.
All right, Charlie Daggett for us in London. As always, Charlie, we thank you, my friend. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.